All right, so since Russia invaded Ukraine, we have seen a pretty massive crackdown both on political opposition as well as on the media ecosystems within Ukraine, within Russia, as well as within here in the United States. And so I wanted to bring you guys some of the latest updates in terms of actions that have been taken by all three of these different players, because I do think that this is part of a broader trend that we see in times of conflict, in times of war, and it isn't something that's just specifically isolated to Ukraine, Russia, or the United States, and it should be condemned across the board. So here to start us off with some of the latest actions, alarming actions that have been taken by Zelensky in the last couple of days. So from The Guardian, they say Ukraine suspends 11 political parties with links to Russia. So it does seem like this with links to Russia is kind of a broad interpretation of what a lot of these parties actually stand for. It is pretty clear, as you're about to see here, that at least some of the major ones do have pretty heavy ties to Russia, but I don't think that necessarily justifies this type of action anyways. But here are some of the details. They say the country's National Security and Defense Council took the decision to ban the parties from any political activity. Most of the parties affected were small, but one of them, the Opposition Platform for Life, has 44 seats in the 450-seat Ukrainian parliament. And Zelensky said, quote, "The activities of those politicians aimed at division or collusion will not succeed, but will receive a harsh response," whatever that means. I guess this is what that means. But the Opposition Platform for Life, Ukraine's biggest opposition party, is led by Viktor Medvedchuk, a pro-Moscow oligarch with close ties to the Russian President Vladimir Putin, and party officials later said the suspension had no legal basis. And the Ukrainian authorities last year charged Medvedchuk, a longtime ally of Putin who is believed to be the godfather of his daughter, with treason, and placed the oligarch on house arrest, a move that angered the Kremlin. And they say Ukraine said that Medvedchuk had escaped house arrest 3 days after Russia started its invasion of Ukraine, and they don't know where the fuck he is. So those are basically some of the details, at least on the major party that was banned, holding 44 seats in parliament. Now, I don't think this is necessarily a good move, regardless if you think that this party was vehemently pro-Putin or vehemently pro-Russian. And there's kind of two sides to this, because you do understand this is a country, Ukraine, that is being actively invaded by Russia. But at the same time, this brings us back to this Cold War mentality, where here in the United States, at least, there was a massive crackdown on anybody who was even perceived to mildly be in line with the Soviet Union, or with communism in general, or socialism in general, or anybody that may even be slightly encompassed within that framework. And so I do think this is massively anti-democratic. This is certainly not pushing for an expansion of democracy in any way, shape, or form. But you do see that he did have pretty close ties to the Kremlin, at least, or directly to Vladimir Putin, at least. But just for a full readout of all of the parties that were banned in this and why this doesn't really make much sense to me. So here's the full list here. They say the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine decided to ban the activity of Opposition Party for Life, Shari Party, Nashi Opposition Bloc, Left Opposition, Union of Left Forces, State, Progressive Socialist Party of Ukraine, Socialist Party of Ukraine, Socialist Party, and Volodymyr Saldo Bloc, Zelensky said. So you can see it's a pretty extensive list here, and at least in names, a lot of these seem like they are left-wing parties, and what I've heard at least suggests that not all of these parties are purely pro-Putin or purely pro-invasion, and that a lot of these people, or a lot of these parties, are just against the war. And so you do have to apply a little bit of nuance, at least, in analyzing this situation, and maybe saying, well, maybe you shouldn't just do a broad strokes ban of all of these different political parties who might not even necessarily have direct nefarious ties to the Kremlin in the first place at all. But again, you see the extensive list here of the parties being banned, and interestingly, one of the parties that was not banned, at least, was one of the most far-right, vehement, arguably Nazi parties that does actually exist and hold seats within the Ukrainian parliament. So just a little bit more details on this group. So they say the far-right groups have also gained political currency in the past decade, none more chilling than the Svoboda Party, formerly the Social National Party of Ukraine, whose leader claimed that the country was controlled by a Muscovite Jewish mafia, and whose deputy used an anti-Semitic slur to describe Ukrainian Ukrainian-born Jewish actor Mila Kunis, and Svoboda has sent several members to Ukraine's parliament, including one who called the Holocaust a bright period in human history, according to Foreign Policy. So again, if you're going to be banning parties out here, I would maybe be banning, the openly Nazi party that has members who are calling the Holocaust a bright period in human history. So, that should be maybe included in this list if you're gonna, be proposing a ban on parties in the first place. But, you don't see that in this entire list of which parties were banned. So again, seems like there's a little bit of a hypocritical notion here, banning more of the left-wing parties or banning just purely anti or purely pro-Putin parties, but not banning the Nazi-associated parties. That's kind of a glaring hypocrisy there. Now, again, I'm not saying these parties are pure or that they don't have bad intentions in this moment right now, at least some of the much more vehemently pro-Putin ones. But again, it doesn't really excuse the fact that you are essentially creating yourself into a at least temporary dictator here, where you're just banning all of the major opposition parties, at least from a certain flank from your left there. But and Putin obviously is not a leftist. That's not at all what I'm trying to imply here. But at least some of those parties, it seemed, were more anti-war than they were pro-Putin. So take that with what you will. But this is also an action that he took in the last couple of days. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky combines all national TV channels to combat alleged misinformation. So listen, we're in the middle of a war right now. Of course, there's going to be misinformation, right? There's misinformation from the pro-Putin angle, where you might have some outlets within Ukraine that are pushing a more pro-Russia sentiment during this ongoing conflict. Now, you'd also have it coming from the opposite side, and that's kind of the point here, is that you're in the middle of a war, right? So misinformation in this sense is just going to be whatever Volodymyr Zelensky or whatever his coalition deems to be misinformation. Now, it's a fact that he's also spreading misinformation, and some of that you might argue is for a good cause in some sense, because he's trying to keep the people of Ukraine motivated. He's trying to get certain things from the West. He still wants a no-fly zone. He still wants the MiG fighter jets, etc. Things that I completely disagree with, because it could escalate towards World War III. It could escalate towards an even worse situation for both the Ukrainian people and for the entire planet, honestly. But, so there's always going to be misinformation coming every which way during a war. That's going to be obvious. Now, again, this is extremely anti-democratic. This is not acceptable, regardless who's doing it. I disagree with Volodymyr Zelensky banning all of these other TV channels and consolidating it to get, one pure message, because, for a lot of different reasons, this might not even be beneficial, right? You do kind of want to hear what the other side is saying, even if you disagree with it, which is exactly why I disagree with, like, for example, here in the United States, us pushing out, RT America and other outlets who some people say are just purely pro-Putin, but who also provide an actual, even if you think that they are purely pro-Putin, RT America or other, stations like that would give you the perspective of what the other side is saying, right? And that's beneficial, not in the sense that you just believe everything that Putin is saying, but it's beneficial in the sense that you want to know what his mindset is. You want to know what types of arguments that he's making to his own people, so that you can then combat that from the other side. So it doesn't necessarily even help to take these broad stroke actions, but this is one of the things that Volodymyr Zelensky was doing in the last couple of days. Now, again, this isn't just a Ukrainian phenomenon. This is something that has been happening in Ukraine recently, especially. It's been something that's been happening in Russia and the United States. So here from Matt Taibbi, he points out what Russia has been doing recently. So in the last weeks, Russia took an already exacting speech environment to new extremes, and he says a law was passed that would impose prison sentences for anyone spreading fake news. Again, arbitrary definition. There is no way to, create a perfect situation where misinformation doesn't spread. It's mostly subjective in terms of what is fake news. It's just going to be what is in line with the state, with the state in Russia, or what is in line with the state in Ukraine, or what is in line with, the State Department talking points here in the United States. So banning fake news about the Ukraine invasion, and access was cut to Facebook and Twitter, and stations like Echo Moskvi and TV Rain, as well as BBC Russia, Radio Liberty, and the New Times, Deutsche Welle, Doxa, and Latvia-based Meduza were effectively shut down. Wikipedia was threatened with a block over its invasion page. Again, they don't even acknowledge that this is an invasion, completely delusional. And national authorities have appeared to step in to prevent coverage of soldiers killed in the war, requiring local outlets to use terms like special operation instead. And they say the latter development is connected to the state media regulator. can't pronounce that name, not even going to try, who issued a remarkably desperate dictum requiring news outlets to use information and data received by them only from Russian sources. So again, only from official Russian sources. In other words, it's just state propaganda and nothing else is being allowed, to get to the Russian people, which is, I think, part of the large reason why we've seen an actual uptick in within Russia in Vladimir Putin's approval rating is because, millions and millions of Russian people, sometimes you can get access to a VPN or other external sources that let you get access to outside information, but for the most part, a huge bulk of the Russian population is not even being told that this is a war or, the character of the war or the actual reasons for the war. So, you have to have that component. Again, you have to condemn this from every side, whether it's Ukraine doing it or Russia doing it. It's, authoritarian, and if you oppose authoritarianism, you should be able to have that nuanced critique here. Now, from the United States, he says on the flip side, a slew of actions have been taken to crack down on fake news and misinformation in the West. The big one was the European Union banning RT and Sputnik, and he says Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube also cut access to all Russian state media because the EU sanctions also required that internet platforms delist any RT or Sputnik content, even from individuals, and the statute reads, as regards the posts made by individuals that reproduce content of RT and Sputnik, those posts shall not be published, and if published, shall be deleted. And he also says other governments across the West, from Australia to Canada, have taken similar actions. And in the US, Google and YouTube disallowed Russian state media ads following a request by Senator Mark Warner, and demonetized a number of Russian channels, including RT, but also many non-Russian individuals, before proceeding to demonetize all individual Russian content creators, even the individuals opposing the invasion. So again, broad strokes here. You're not even just going after like purely pro-Putin propaganda, if you want to call it that. You're also just sweeping up tons of people who might not even be in favor of the invasion or are actively speaking out against the invasion. So, a little bit of a, contradiction there, but they say even DuckDuckGo, the speechier, more pro-privacy alternative to Google, announced that it was de-ranking sites associated with Russian disinformation. Again, who's to say what's Russian disinformation? It's massively subjective. But he says a growing list of Westerners have seen accounts frozen for supposed parroting of Russian talking points or abusive commentary. So again, the lesson here is that this is one of the consequences, unfortunately, of being in a hot war like this, right? You're always going to have misinformation. You're always going to have narratives that are coming from every single side, because every single player in this entire conflict, whether it's Russia or NATO countries like the United States or Ukraine, they all have their own agenda that they're trying to push right now, right? Vladimir Putin obviously doesn't even want to acknowledge that this is an invasion. He's lying to the people of Russia and trying to tell them that this is some special military operation to denazify Ukraine. It's complete bullshit, but that's what he wants to push, and so he's creating a firmer grip on the information that Russian people are allowed to have access to. Now, it's again the same thing in Ukraine to different varying degrees here in the United States, but across the board, it's not a good thing. It's authoritarian. It's massively anti-democratic, especially in the case of banning opposition parties, as Zelensky was doing. So it's incredibly authoritarian, incredibly undemocratic, and not acceptable when anybody does it.